Yeah, cool. So that crosses quite a few different areas. I've got my degree in software developing. I started out working in networking, moved over into security, and then application delivery, and most recently identity. And so with that 20 years of experience, I think probably the best advice I can give you today is to hold on to those peer authenticators. They're going to be worth a lot in the future. But regardless, yeah, so one of the things I've observed about working in identity is that a lot of the people I talk to have been in the industry for like 20 years, and Adrian highlighted that point nicely when he introduced himself. And so I often hear stories around, you'll meet someone and they'll tell you about how they coded Active Directory in Bill Gates' basement or something like that. And then you'll go away and find out that it was actually true. And so compared to people like that, I do feel like a relative newcomer. I've been in identity itself for about 5 or 6 years now. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about that newcomer perspective and hopefully share some of that with people who've been in the industry for a while. Now this keeps forward for some reason. Cool. So my story started at the Telstra Global Operations Centre here in Melbourne. I was setting up SSO for a single app there. And so anyone who has visited the GOC knows that it's an impressive facility. But I wasn't in the actual GOC itself. I was in the back office, which looked a bit more like this. Period accurate planking, that was going wild in 2012. So yeah, that was me. And then I was there to do SSO for a single application. And again, hope everyone who's been here for a while is giving me kudos for the period accurate logos. But yeah, so we set that up. It might seem strange today, but that took about, I can't remember the exact timeline, but that was a 6 to 12 month project just to get SSO working for a single app. And that's because at that time, it wasn't just a case of doing a quick config and getting it up and running. We actually had to deploy a cluster of F5s with APM and get the infrastructure side working. So that was quite a lengthy project. Traditional waterfall model for that, right? It was high level design, detailed design, do the implementation, do all the handover docs, give it to operations, and ran it. And we know that today companies are really looking for more SaaS rather than waterfall, more agile. The reality is they don't want to spend time and money on that, right? They want to get things done and they want it done quickly. So I finished up that project, I moved on to other things, and from there I started doing lots of larger projects, but in between them, in the quiet times, I'd find myself occasionally setting up a SAML connection for one company or another. And it was a lot better than the 6 to 12 months it took for Telstra to get SSO working there. That was a 1 to 2 week exercise in most cases. And there was 3 factors behind that. So the first of those was a skills misalignment. At that point in time, the people who were setting these up weren't identity professionals. It was generally a sysadmin, a network admin, whoever had kind of proximity to the problem got lumped with it. So that was one thing. There was also a lot of manual work involved. So SAML metadata is a thing that helps auto-configure these. I think it was around then, but no one used it. And so rather than using metadata, we would email back and forth the configurations.
That wasn't your time, by the way.
We would send each other text messages with secrets. And then also, you had 2 people on different ends of the organization, different priorities, different schedules. Whenever someone made a typo in the config, you then had to wait until everyone was available to do the troubleshooting. So now we're at a point where it's better. We've gone from 6 months down to 2 weeks, but still not great by today's standards. And so while I wouldn't say anyone in this room is an identity infant, or at that time, the industry as a whole has matured a lot since then. So we have the fortunate position of being where we are in that a lot of people now specialize in identity, everyone in this room, I imagine. Whereas back then it was more of a multi-function, cross-function type thing. And also the standards have gotten a lot better. People are using SAML metadata. Personally, I like OIDC. I can get an OIDC session up and running pretty quickly. But my real introduction to identity came around 2017, 2018, that sort of timeline. And so at that time, I was working for Telstra in their products organization, and they had an identity problem. So they had a strategic identity initiative that was going a little bit off the rails, and so I came in as part of the team to try and get it back on track. And thankfully, all of the issues they had were program level things. They weren't necessarily technology issues. So with a few changes to the program, they were able to start delivering some pretty significant outcomes. So for anyone in this room who is a Telstra customer, you almost certainly have used this platform to log in at some point. But probably the biggest milestone from my point of view was the decommissioning of a system called SIBS. I don't know what SIBS stands for. It's so old, no one knows as far as I can tell. It actually dates back to mid to late 90s. So when Telstra acquired Big Pond, for anyone who's old enough to remember that, SIBS was their identity system that came over to Telstra. And so that was the first identity system in Telstra. They had tried to decommission that multiple times. And inevitably what happens is you try to replace one system with another, it fails, now you got two systems. Then you try again and you got three. So that happened multiple times over the years. They were finally able to decommission that last year, which was a massive milestone for them. I'm getting lots of sympathetic looks from you.
Some of us worked on that, by the way.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if someone here didn't. So this was very similar to my time in the GOC in that this was an infrastructure heavy lift, albeit on a much larger scale. And I actually believe that infrastructure done right can be kind of beautiful, but the reality is that it's hard, it's expensive. Most companies don't want to spend their time there, they want to be doing other activities. And so for all of these reasons and more, most companies have a cloud-first strategy these days. They want SaaS, they want Agile. And for anyone who's looking at me thinking, thanks for the stunning insight, just bear with me, we are going somewhere with this.
This is the best way.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with some of the more current trends now. I talked a little bit about agility, and pipelines are a big thing in most companies now. So pipelines are really the way we're delivering speed and reliability in our solutions these days. They help us automate the testing, the deployment, and the rollback, and potentially even self-service. So really, there's no reason that something that used to take 6 to 12 months or 1 to 2 weeks can't be done within 5 minutes these days. Another current trend is orchestration. So people think of different things when they think of identity orchestration. I think it depends who's selling to them at that particular point in time. For me, I think about a low-code integration tool that has an experience wrapped around it. So we all know identity doesn't exist in a vacuum. It does need to work with other systems, CRMs, HR, SailPoint, Savient, and so on. Having something like an identity orchestrator makes these capabilities much easier to integrate into the system. And someone before asked a question about mergers and acquisitions and how they work. That's a perfect use case for this sort of thing that can really help accelerate those types of activities. The other thing for me is wrapping the UX around it. So it's not enough to just have the back end automated and things happening behind the scenes. We do need to be able to propagate that information up to the users, and where it makes sense to do so, inform them of what's happening, let them know that something's gone wrong, whatever the case is. So none of this is new. We've been doing this in identity for a long time, but it is a massive accelerator for what we do. And if we're having forward-looking statements, we can't not talk about ChatGPT. I'm not going to labour it. I know you're all sick of hearing about it, but one of the main use cases of ChatGPT is for boilerplate and starter code. So you've got a project, you need to get something started, you put a little prompt in and it sort of gives you maybe some code that you can build on, whatever the case is. And as an example of this, one of my colleagues in the US, who is a product engineer, he went to ChatGPT and he gave it a series of requirements, and he said, based on these requirements, I need you to build me a Helm chart for ping identity. So for anyone who's not familiar with a Helm chart, it's like a Kubernetes configuration. It helps you stand something up quickly. So he gave it the prompt, and sure enough, it just came through with a Helm chart that was 95% correct. So that's the sort of thing that probably would have taken, depending on your level of expertise, anywhere between 20 minutes and 2 days. ChatGPT just did it for you on the spot. And so I'd be pretty amazed. There's a lot of vendors in the room today, as we've already noted. I reckon this has got to be on the radar for every product organisation who's currently here today. It'll be very interesting to see what comes out of ChatGPT and other generative AI technologies in the near future. The other thing I've been looking at lately is VC funding. So new startups who are coming through, getting their seed funding, getting Series A, Series B, and particularly in the identity space, what that looks like. And I'm seeing two categories that are generating interest at the moment. The first one is orchestration, which I've kind of already touched on. To be honest, I think if you're getting funding now for orchestration, you probably missed the boat. There are very mature solutions out in the market today. And for example, if you logged on to the FIFA streaming site during the World Cup, that was something that ran through our orchestration engine. So a lot going on there. But for me, the interesting part is prediction and remediation. So there's quite a few coming through at the moment that are focused on reviewing and monitoring identity environments, and they talk about being cross-vendor, so it'll be across RGA, IDAM, and PAM, and looking at those environments and suggesting changes. So looking at your posture and saying, if you want to do things better, this is what you could potentially look at doing. At the same time, one of the other areas of interest is around predicting the outcomes of those changes. So based on a specific change, what impact is that going to have in your environment? And so we do this today with authorization. We have a visual policy builder. If you make changes to that, you can run sample data through it and see how the sample data responds to the new policy before you push it into production. But we're also looking to roll this type of thing out to more and more capabilities that we have. And so one easy example for that is around our risk engine. If you change thresholds in terms of the cutoffs for where something gets flagged, we're going to be letting you run that profile against previously observed traffic to tell you what it thinks is going to happen if you do that now. The last thing I'm going to talk about in terms of what's coming down the line is decentralized identity. And so some of the things I've been talking about have been primarily focused on optimization, acceleration. This is a little bit different in that it's more of a paradigm change. So if we look at identity today, every company owns the identity data. And in that scenario, the users themselves are kind of second-class citizens. They don't have control of it. They're really at the mercy of the companies. Decentralized identity looks to change this by giving users the ability to store their own data in a secure wallet on their own device. And so in this scenario, an organization like a bank or a government entity can issue a verified credential that gets stored in that user's wallet, and then another organization can consume the credential for some purpose. And so that might be to register a user onto their system, it could be to authenticate them, or it could just be to verify them for a specific use case. And so this isn't going to replace centralized identity, it's definitely going to be an augmentation. But we're seeing a lot of interest in this from the Australian companies around minimization of exposure to PII. So for example, rather than storing a user's date of birth, if you don't really need the date of birth, you could instead store a verified assertion that they're over the age of 18. And so that way you've got only the data you need, not all the things you don't. So that's what's coming down the line. I'll just do a quick recap at this point. So we talked about the old world being waterfall, it was very infrastructure heavy, lots of proprietary protocols. I actually forgot to mention it was Kerberos, that was another reason it took a while. Materials then weren't that great. But also customization heavy. So if we flash forward to today, we're in a world where agile is the norm, SaaS is everywhere. We're using open standards more, which is great. And also we're leaning more towards orchestration rather than customization now. In terms of what's next, who knows what the impact of generative AI is going to be. We've also got our predictive models that I discussed, and then also decentralization as a way of minimizing PII exposure. Even so, there is still some heavy lifting to do. A lot of companies are still dealing with legacy, and a lot of them have made good progress, like Telstra with the decommissioning of SIBs. But this is something that companies will have to deal with for the foreseeable future. So anyone who's deploying an identity solution, maintaining it, is going to have to take on that responsibility. And that's something that is going to take time, it's going to take energy. One of the things I sometimes forget about SaaS is, you think about it as a flick the switch kind of a solution, turn the key, however you want to put it. The reality is these things still need to be productionized. We still need logging, monitoring, key rotation, everything that's required to make your environment secure and manageable. But we're also building those pipelines that accelerate things. So every company has a different pipeline, different integrations. Even where you do have something like an out-of-the-box Terraform provider, there's still going to be a little bit of lift required to get that right. And so the final and probably the most important thing is security. So getting things done quickly is all well and good, but due care does need to be given in securing not just the stand-up, but every single change that gets pushed into an environment. And so the conclusion I've reached in writing this isn't the one I expected to when I started. When you look at all the breaches that have happened, we've all discussed those. For me, it's really driven home the importance of what we all do in this room as professionals. And so if anything, I think the burden of protecting people's identities is actually as heavy as it's ever been. But we have come a long way. Awareness around identity is at an all-time high, and I think that's an advantage that we can't let slip. Unlike 10 years ago, identity is a widely recognized discipline rather than something that was just cross-function. And that gives us more access to identity professionals than we've ever had before. And we also have a vast and capable suite of solutions and tools at our disposal. So I, for one, feel pretty good about the future. I really appreciate the time you've given me. Thank you, and carry on.
Questions for Steve? We've got 1 minute and 18 seconds.
Got one. Decentralized identity. Love the concept. Is it using blockchain technology? Do you know much about that? Is that how it's...
Yeah, so the question was, does decentralized identity use blockchain? The answer is it depends on the standard. So there's a number of competing standards in this space around how decentralized identity works. Some of them use blockchain, some don't. Cool.
Fantastic.
Thank you.